A University of Johannesburg PhD candidate, Norman Shoko, has been found guilty of plagiarism and expelled for 3 years. This is following a prolonged disciplinary process that left him in limbo for 4 years. The theology student faced charges of academic dishonesty in September 2021 when it was discovered that his thesis contained substantial plagiarized material. The issue arose when Shoko submitted his thesis to UJ's Turnitin software, a plagiarism detection tool. The software flagged a similarity index of 45%, indicating that nearly half of his work closely matched existing sources. Let's now speak to Adrian Garden, a Dean of Academics at the IIE Rosebank College. A very good morning to you, Adrian. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. I want to start off with the definition of plagiarism and the definition of academic fraud.
Sure. Good morning. Good morning to your viewers. Plagiarism is at its basic, or in its basic form, is where you take somebody else's work and you pass it off as your own. It's a very serious transgression in academia, where you pass off somebody's ideas and somebody who's researched, and it almost becomes your own work, and you don't reference the person or the originator of that work correctly in your academic work going forward. So it seems as if you are the one who generated that concept, and you lay claim to it, as it were, when that isn't the case. And that is essentially then becomes academic fraud, because the fraud is where you essentially take somebody's idea and you pass it off as your own, and that's where the fraudulence comes in.
Yeah, and as you said now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't reference other work. You can cite other work, but you need to make sure that you also say who that work is from.
Absolutely correct. And, whether it's a presentation or an article, or even a thesis, the need to clearly reference where other people's work comes into your own, either as a support or as a critique or as a counterpoint to the point you're trying to make. It must be very clear that, or the distinguishment must be clear between your work and the work that you're bringing in from other sources.
Yeah. Ordinarily, a PhD candidate would have a supervisor. What would the role of the supervisor then be with regards to all of this, and also steering the student to ensure that they meet all of the criteria to get their qualification at the end of making their submission?
Yeah, so the role of the supervisor is to give academic guidance. And it really has a lot to do with the structure of the proposal, the content of the proposal, and the flow of the information that goes in there. The responsibility, though, for academic credibility remains with the student. So typically, all students, be they undergraduate or postgraduate or doctoral students, have got access to plagiarism software. So when they're submitting their proposal or a piece of a proposal, the onus is on them to ensure that, you indicated that 45% similarity through Turnitin. The onus is on the student to ensure that the similarity percentage is within tolerance, and that you're using that software correctly to identify areas where you haven't correctly referenced something prior to submitting it to the supervisor. I do think, though, that a supervisor also has the responsibility, if they suspect that there's a high similarity, that they should point that out to the student and ensure that the student rectifies that or any subsequent submissions going forward.
So does this mean that no finding could be made against the supervisor?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one, because the supervisor doesn't submit your proposal. So as I've indicated before, the onus is on them to ensure academic credibility. So, and because it's your own work, especially at a PhD level, you can't necessarily rely on the supervisor to do that kind of checks for you. In my own experience, even at the master's level, prior to submitting to the supervisor, there was quite clear policy guidance to say, you as the student must ensure that you are not plagiarizing and that your academic integrity is intact. And you do that using the following tools. The university also had quite a bit of support. You know, you've got classes, you've got online resources that allow you to navigate this academic uncertainty. So as much as a supervisor is there to give guidance, the onus does remain on the student to ensure that prior to any submission, they are not falling into the plagiarism trap.
Yeah. Then let's deal with the disciplinary processes that then unfold. In this particular case, according to this report by the City Press, MJ van Aans, the chairperson of the disciplinary committee, of course, found Shoko guilty, but also cited that he used work or plagiarized work from Professor Crafter. But then in his response, and this is now trying to appeal this finding, according to this City Press article, Shoko then pointed out that Professor Crafter's testimony shouldn't have been deemed admissible or should have been deemed inadmissible due to his prior exposure to the entire bundle of documents, and that Van Aans, the chairperson, failed to properly address this conflict of interest. Does conflict really arise when, as part of the investigation, there is the conversation that would take place between the disciplinary committee, whoever is investigating the matter, as well as the person who may have been cited in this particular research and whose work has allegedly been plagiarized?
I'm sure that could well be the case. I think the legal process must follow. All academic institutions have a disciplinary procedure in place, and it also allows for somebody who's accused of a serious offense like this to follow all recourses in terms of ensuring that this is an objective exercise, much like our legal system does as well. You know, we're not out to, it's not like a lynch mob that is out to get people. So in this instance, all of the avenues that are being pursued are legitimate avenues that can be pursued. Whether or not that is the case will have to be a finding in due course using those processes. I do think, though, I mean, you know, just if I read the overview, and of course, I'm not party to the detail, I think at the core of this, the essence of this, there's a lot to answer for in terms of how much content was actually unreferenced, and you know, and I'm sure that the individual is looking to ensure that their reputation remains intact. But I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of evidence that indicates that the finding, the original finding, is accurate.
Yeah. So the sanction is that that he would be expelled. But I want to know from a perspective of understanding plagiarism to also mean that you've stolen somebody else's work. Is there any other recourse that, for instance, the likes of Professor Crawford can pursue, or any other interested party to bring Shoko to book outside of what has already taken place within the academic space?
Yeah, I think that would be a difficult one. It would almost have to be a criminal case, you know, of fraud outside of academia. So in this instance, I'm in agreement, and that the professor's best option in terms of protecting their own integrity is through the academic disciplinary procedure that is in place.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Adrian Garden there, Dean of Academics at IIE Rosebank College, and this is on a story relating to a PhD student from the University of Johannesburg, who has now been expelled.